Welcome to A Photographer's Life, the channel that takes you behind the curtain into the world of professional architectural photography. Join us now for an episode with one of America's premier architectural photographers. Today's broadcast comes from a recent interview with prominent American architectural photographer Barry Grossman. Today's interview was conducted by AIAP Director Alan Blakely. We hope you enjoy the show. If you do, please let us know by liking this episode and subscribing to this channel. Now, on with the show.
We'd like to welcome you to this AIAP interview with photographer Barry Grossman. Barry, welcome. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, sir.
Barry is one of the premier architectural photographers in the United States, as well as an educator, and we're happy to talk with you today. And Barry, let's just jump right in with how did you actually get into photography to begin with? What was the start or the spark of that whole business?
Well, for me, it's probably not that different from a lot of photographers in our group. But I'll tell you my story briefly. It probably flashes back to when I was 5 or 6, and my father was a bit of an amateur photographer. And he kept his camera in his office with a leather case, and only on special occasions would he take it out. And so I, at a very young age, kind of thought of not just his camera, his still camera, but his movie camera.
Okay.
I had a certain reverence to the equipment itself, because he treated it so carefully. Like, he was a very meticulous person. He was a PhD in the sciences, and he was a very scientific mind. And so I kind of saw this camera, and when he brought it out, I loved the way it sounded. I loved the way it smelled. There was something magical about the camera coming out of that leather case. And when I was a little bit older, maybe 7 or 8, I was so fascinated that I wanted to use it. And I had an immediate attraction to the magic of picture taking. And I actually think I was in my first photography class back in New York, in Brooklyn, where I grew up.
Okay.
I don't know how this happened. I think I was only in like 4th or 5th grade. They had a little photography week or two where we got to go into the dark room. So as a young...
Oh, nice.
I was exposed to photography. And interestingly enough, the pictures that I first started taking, not that they were anything wonderful, they weren't, but I created little scenes. So it might have been my friends and my brother, pretending to do something, right? Pick up a bike and ride it, or open up a door into a house. So I was shooting, interestingly enough, movement and motion and trying to capture it with a still picture. And I kind of always thought that was what led me down the road of what I eventually wanted to study in school and did, which was cinematography and filmmaking. So I was very, very interested in it all through high school, and then decided to major in film in college.
Okay.
And I pretty much minored in photography, basically any elective I had. And we were in a performing arts program in Syracuse University.
Yeah.
Go Orange. And so it was all filmmaking. It was very production and film theory based.
Yeah.
And the curriculum was also very strong in the fine arts. And so I had a very in-depth, I don't want to say in-depth training, but all through high school and in college, I did a lot of studio arts courses, drawing and painting. Mostly 2D work, not so much sculptural or 3D, a little bit of that, but a lot of producing of work. And so as a young person, it was very part of my life to be producing work. And that for sure has influenced my career, because as a young photographer, and even as I became more established, I've always been the type of person that wanted to shoot a lot. It wasn't kind of okay with me, and some of it was financially based, not going to lie about that, but if I wasn't shooting daily as a young photographer, I felt like I was not being productive. And so I think that kind of goes back to my film my film days and my film background,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Um, uh, the art classes and kind of the art education that you have, has that changed, do you think, or influenced the way you shoot,
Yeah,
having that art
definitely.
background?
Um, for me, the foundational aspect of how I compose, the what I think is beautiful,
Hmm.
uh, was definitely influenced going back to my earliest days as a quote unquote artist. And I didn't start to think of myself as an artist until I was maybe 15, 16 years old. I was very fortunate. I went to a public high school,
Hmm.
but I had a couple of, and one in particular, very influential art teachers who
Okay.
was a very serious artist.
Mm.
And he was more of a child of the 60s and 70s and very expressive. I was very much into abstract expressionism, in addition to learning how to draw from life. He was
Mm.
a wonderful high school teacher. I mean, they don't make them like that anymore. If they, or and maybe they do, and I hope they do for younger
So too.
people in the arts. It for sure influenced how I think about composition, how I think about, what I love about image making.
Hmm.
And I really never considered a career in photography until later on in life. And I guess we can get to that part of the story.
Yeah, we'll want to talk about your career path, but I kind of wanted to get a little bit of understanding of what your basis was here, and
Right.
in art, and where that foundation comes from. And I think that's fascinating that you say that you didn't major in photography, because quite honestly, I've yet to interview anyone in our group who
Mhm.
majored in photography.
Right. I guess that's a rarity in our specialty. There's probably a handful of people that are architects and people that come from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
For me, I would say, and this might be the first time I've actually spoken about this, is with you. Now that I've thought about it, it's really how I become uh, the type of photographer who has his own style, and I think that's super
Hmm.
important to talk about that. For
Yeah.
sure, comes through my background as an artist, drawing and painting, etc. And it set the stage for, again, what excites me in picture making,
Okay.
um, and ultimately that is to have my own signature on my work that feels like um, the images are coming from me as much as they are, of course, coming from the client and the subject matter that they're providing.
Right. But you definitely have a style, and it's very distinctive, and people obviously hire you for that
Yeah,
style because regardless of what the project is, they're hiring Barry because they wanted a photograph of how Barry sees that project.
yeah,
and
100%.
and so
To me,
that.
that's the most important, or one of the most important aspects of any photographer's business, is to
uh
have his or her own signature style and be recognized for it. I mean, there's a lot of other things that obviously make up a successful photographer's portfolio.
hmm
Um, we could talk about those, but absolutely, I think it's imperative that we have. You don't want to blend in. You don't want your work to
no.
blend in to a morass of images that is now kind of proliferating our culture. And
Yeah.
there's so many images out there, and so many ways to create those images. I think it's important, for me at least, whenever possible, and it's not on every job, but as many jobs as possible, that I'm able to put even if it's this big or this big, my stamp, my signature
Yeah.
on the look.
Exactly. I appreciate that. So let's talk about your career path. As
Sure.
you know, leaving university, and where did you go from there, and how did that
Um,
develop?
I guess I was lucky. We did 4 years in Syracuse.
Hmm.
I met my then and continues to be my now wife in Syracuse. She was also a film art major
Congratulations.
like I was. And it was Teresa. She's a wonderful artist and illustrator and filmmaker.
Mm.
And she had family down here. And so we graduated in the late 80s.
Hmm.
And we kind of came down on the heels of the Miami Vice era. So I
Sure.
worked in film production
Okay.
primarily in the Miami area for about 8 years ish.
Okay.
Um, all the while kind of going back to New York. And I always say unofficially attending NYU grad film school. I
Okay.
say unofficially because I had several friends, including my cousin, who I consider to be almost like a brother to me, attending NYU's grad film school. Uh,
Mm,
for better or for worse, I did my film school undergrad, and they did it as a graduate student. And so the cool thing was I got to go to NYU
yeah.
through these guys, and I shot about whatever a dozen projects up there within that
Nice.
capacity, within uh, having all that equipment, which is a nice higher
Oh,
level.
yes.
All filmed, by the way, 16 millimeter, super 16 millimeter, but their film lockers were huge. All
Mm,
the lighting you could imagine. Now, back then, it was all Mole Richardson, it was all tungsten, a few HMI, which is basically continuous
yeah.
daylight balanced
Right.
light. Um, and that's pretty much where I really kind of cut my teeth making the best images of my life as a young guy in his early 20s to mid 20s. And so I was going back and forth from New York working on these film projects, some of which were student level, truthfully, and some of which were professional level, because these are some talented people up there with great equipment
Sure.
uh, and decent budgets on some of these things. And so we had a very high standard. Uh,
Mm,
so I think that experience definitely helped me understand the collaborative nature of image making. Because
okay.
when you're a filmmaker today, maybe things are different, but filmmaking back then was super collaborative, and
Oh, sure. Yeah.
you're maybe more than a rudder on the ship. Maybe you're the engine as the cinematographer. So it was a pretty privileged and cool position to be in. And we did a whole host of different projects. And again, for me, establishing and continuing to hone my own lighting and creative style as a cinematographer and photographer. And I was able to work on a bunch of really cool projects. One in particular was an homage to old classic horror films of the late 30s and early 40s,
Okay.
and a lot of very cool architectural locations. So we were shooting in
Oh,
like the Hall of Records in New York City, the Lyndhurst Castle, which is, I forget, it was in Jersey or Long Island, outside of the city,
mhm.
inside, outside, and a bunch of cool churches in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And so that, I know at some point you're going to say, how did you want to get to start shooting interiors? I mean, honestly, my love for shooting architecture and interior design um, or interior architecture
Mhm.
really was formed through some of my film experiences as well. And using a lot of lighting, because as you know, back in the day, there was no really quality photography, stills or otherwise, without the implementation and utilization of photographic lighting. You couldn't
And
just
usually
show
a
up and
lot
take
of
a picture,
it.
right? So that's kind of why I still have those habits
Mhm. Well,
years
yeah,
later. A little different, but yeah.
I wanted to relate back to that because, it's interesting, a film background like that, you learn about, not only controlling light, but creating light,
Exactly.
creating a look, and, um, I'm not sure that exists to a very great degree these days.
Yeah.
I don't really, I'm not in touch with the film school kind of situation these days, but I have a similar kind of background as far as learning to light, and my early photography, of course, was on 4x5 or 8x10 transparencies,
Me too.
and very complex as far as the lighting situation. And how does now that you're shooting digital, how does that translate? Do you still apply those same
Yeah,
principles to your
for
shots?
sure. I think the premise that you're kind of describing, the film school premise or the
Mhm.
filmmaking premise, is what's happening in front of the camera, and how does that apply to how we shoot today? And
Mhm.
I definitely feel like, look, we all know how significant post production is, but let's not forget how significant setting your camera up is,
Yeah.
and putting and composing and sculpting and including or excluding things that might live or should live in front of the camera, and that includes everything from furnishings to light as well.
Mhm.
So I'm a strong proponent of make it right in camera, with the knowledge being that, listen, we have a digital darkroom to compose and arrange those elements. So I think being influenced by filmmaking, which may or may not have changed over the decades, I don't think it has, because I think for the most part,
No,
unless
I
you're
don't
doing
think
some
so.
very heavy, yeah, it has to be right in front of the camera. And
Exactly.
I always kind of jokingly say that, to some of my clients, I say, listen, doing this, meaning setting the camera up and composing and shooting, I go, this isn't the work. The work's going to be tomorrow and the next day when we have to put it together in post production. That's really the
Yeah.
work. At least that's how I feel. And on set and shooting, that's the joy. That's the artistic
Oh, sure.
experience. That's the collaborative experience. And that also kind of, we could talk about another very important aspect of what it is we do, and that is the collaborative aspect of it. I mean, for me, for better or for worse, I'm not showing up and taking these photographs just for me. I'm showing up because they're telling me to or asking me to. And
And paying you for it.
yeah, we're there for them. We're there for them. And so whoever they are at any particular day. And so I never forget that, and haven't forgotten it over all these years, that I'm there for my clients. And I think that's an important lesson for really any photographer, certainly young,
Sure.
up and coming,
Mhm.
people that are dedicated to their work. It's wonderful to have a signature. It's wonderful to have, that artistry, and to have that integrity
Mhm.
attached to your work. But, let's not forget that, who's bringing us to the party most of the time. It's somebody
Exactly.
inviting us to the experience.
Mhm. Yeah, well said. I appreciate that. So let me ask you, when did the transition happen from cinematography
Oh,
and film production
yeah,
into
it's
stills?
interesting. Well, let me think. The years. I think. Well, I basically was done with NYU in the late '90s. I think my last project I shot was '97, '98,
Mhm.
and real life kind of gets in the way sometimes. I shouldn't say gets in the way, but
Doesn't it?
one's life path, will influence one's career path. So I had a
Oh, sure.
wife. I was now a father for the second time as a young
Mhm.
man, and so going back and forth to New York for 6 weeks, 8 weeks,
Mm.
10 weeks at a time to work on these passion projects, as one may call them, it got harder and harder.
Oh,
And
sure.
so I started to, and I was still doing my still photography as a young photographer. At
Okay.
the time, I was shooting 4x5
Mhm.
transparencies, and grinding and trying to get, as a young 23, 25-year-old, get in the doors of some of these established interior design firms. And
Mhm.
for me, most of my clients were the interior designers,
Okay.
not the architects. And
Mm.
maybe that's just the way it was down here in the Miami area, but that was the hot, at least for me,
Sure.
um, market. That's where the excitement was for me. And
Mhm.
so I probably think of myself more of, at this point, and certainly historically, as an interior shooter than
Okay.
an exterior shooter, even though of course you need to do both.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I would say the transition happened late '90s, mid to late '90s,
Mhm.
where I basically was like, okay, I'm not going to New York anymore. I was
Mhm.
still picking up local work. So, for example, I probably did, and I've lost count, but 60 to 70 or 80 film commercials, music videos, stuff like that. So I was operating and earning some money on a freelance basis as a
Yeah.
DP, as a director of photography,
Yeah.
on low budget to medium low budget music videos
Okay.
and commercials down here. But I've done it all in film production. I've done everything from painted sets down here, to gaff, being a gaffer, a
Mhm.
grip, but basically grip and electrical departments, transitioning a little bit to the camera departments, and functioning as an AC for a couple of cinematographers.
Okay.
But not many of those cinematographers down here. I mean, it was easy for me to transition from lighting to camera, and then from camera, once people kind of trusted me, to be the shooter, which was a lot of fun.
Interesting. Now, when you went into still photography, self-employment, and those kinds of things, was architecture your subject of choice?
I earned my living as a young still photographer, shooting interior and architecture. Yes, that was really, I'm not so sure it was my first of choice, but I just kind of fell into that industry. And I had a few other commercial clients. I shot cosmetics. I shot perfumes. I was assisting as a very young guy down here, after school, a wedding portrait photographer and wedding photographer. And one of the reasons I did that is because, he had the 4x5 camera in the corner that he never used. And I also helped shoot video for him. So I was doing a little bit of everything, jack of all trades for this guy. Yeah. And it was actually kind of cool. You learn a little bit everywhere. This guy didn't have any formal training, but he knew how to communicate with people. He was a wonderful, I would even say borderline master portraitist. He was a really, really good wedding photographer. Not that I ever wanted to do that, but it was kind of cool to watch him work and help him. I would set the lighting up for him, and he would ask me for some of my dramatic stuff every now and again when it was appropriate, and for portrait work. But I learned a lot from him, and he gave me the 4x5 camera basically. And so when I'm going back to 91, 92, so we're going back a long time. That's pretty much where I said, okay, now I'm an architectural photographer. I have the camera to prove it. And you needed it. You weren't working, you weren't getting hired, and the magazines weren't putting your work anywhere unless you gave them that 4x5.
That's true.
So, however bad those pictures were, they at least were 4x5 bad. So it meant a lot. But I did a little bit of everything, and then little by little started to phase out some of the, I would say late 90s. So within 4 to 5 years, I started to phase out shooting the product stuff and only started shooting interiors. And I was lucky because I connected with a couple of magazines. I did a lot of grinding as a young guy. And one last thing I'll mention, it's not the most interesting part of my career, but I'll mention this. From 1995 to 2000, in the midst of all this, I partnered with, somebody who's a good friend now, but he ran a mom and pop E6 lab. So he processed all the transparency film in the Fort Lauderdale area. There's a couple of big film processing lab houses down here. One was in Miami, one was in Fort Lauderdale. Admittedly, his was a mom and pop shop, but a lot of top shooters went to him. Got personal service. And 1995, he and I were chatting, and he's like, I want to open up a digital studio. He goes, why don't you run it and we'll be partners? And I was like, okay, let's do that. And so 1995 to 2000, we had a little digital studio. We had a drum scanner that wasn't very little, and we scanned all the transparencies. The cool thing about it was, with digital starting to become more required, that was the beginning. It was cool for me to have a $70,000 drum scanner at my disposal. We had big digital printers. I remember not only did we lease the Mac, we leased the RAM in the Mac. That's how expensive these things were. Remember, we leased RAM, it was like $2,000 for RAM. So it was cool to have a digital setup for Grossman photography, that I can use all that equipment whenever I wanted. And I ran that studio for us, doing everything from graphic design, logo design. We subbed out some of that stuff. In fact, my wife was a wonderful logo designer. She did some of that stuff for us. And towards the end, it became quite apparent that, I really wanted to move on and do more shooting. I was still doing my shooting in those days, but it was hard to do all these things at once. Sure. So maybe that experience was one of the reasons that my film career kind of had to take a back seat, because I was running 2 businesses, and running 3 was near impossible.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of fascinating. So when you made the jump into architectural and on your own, um, what kind of clientele did you go after? I mean, did you have a market in mind that you wanted to shoot for? Was it the interior designers, or
Yeah.
how did you
I
market yourself?
I am trying to think. I had a connection at an interior design company,
Hmm.
and as a young person, I got an interview.
Okay.
Now, this particular interior design company was, one of the big ones down here, and one of the
Okay.
big ones down here meant like 40 designers
Wow.
working underneath, and it was in a beautiful downtown Miami
Hmm.
office. And I remember walking in as like a 23, 24-year-old guy and meeting with their marketing director, and we were chatting, and I had a little bit of a portfolio, not much, but maybe I had a little bit of naive confidence is what I had, that I kind of walked in. I got the interview, and she basically was like, okay, she's going to love you. She goes, what do you charge? And I told her what I charge. She says, no, you don't. She goes, you charge double that. Otherwise, she's not going to take you seriously. Okay, I
Good
guess I'll
point.
charge
Yeah.
double that now. Okay. So that experience was interesting. And it was kind of cool to be the young photographer on the block. And
Yeah.
that kind of opened my eyes, gave me more portfolio,
Hmm.
and it just became a snowball. So basically, as a young guy, 23, 24, 25, 26, I started to grind and generate a portfolio. And
Okay.
again, all film, all 4x5
Yeah.
film, it had to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. I've still got mine in a box.
So I may be avoiding the issue, why architecture, why interior. I think it was kind of, I don't want to say it was an accident, but it was kind of, I enjoy the designers. True, I enjoy the collaborative nature of working with most all of my designers. And even then, as a younger person, they were artistic, they were cool, they loved the process of picture making, um,
Hmm.
and that really made sense to me, because coming from my film background, it was always a process to build and create an image. And that's kind of what the same experience with them. We were shooting black and white Polaroids,
Hmm.
move the chair an inch to the left, change the flower out for something else. So even as a young photographer learning, and certainly by no means was I creating fantastic work back then, it was just more of the experience of working with these people that just made a lot of sense to me.
Hmm.
And I vibed with these,
Yeah.
with the market. It was a good connection for me, less so than the architects. I had a couple of architects back in
Yeah.
the day, that I got started with, but I might have been too young for them. Maybe I was a little too artsy for them. It was a different photographer, I guess, that they were looking for. But the designers embraced me even as a young guy.
Yeah. And it was, I had kind of a similar experience, but for me, you mentioned about that collaboration with those artistic people, and I
Yeah.
learned so much from interior designers early on, just
Exactly.
about placement and composition, because they would look at a Polaroid and they would see shapes and
Right.
negative and positive spaces and things like that, where that wasn't the experience that I had with architects.
That's
And
interesting.
the interior designers seem to have an aptitude for photography and composition that I don't think any other market segment seems to have. So it was, for me, it was very educational to work with
Oh yeah,
a really good.
100%. And even when we were shooting Polaroids,
Yeah.
and for me, the Polaroid test back then, I used to think I was keeping Polaroid in business back then. But for me, I eventually, we were the black and white Polaroid,
Yeah.
with the magnifying glass. How close can we get?
Yeah.
And for sure, some of those lessons, you're not going to learn them anywhere else. You're not going to learn. I'm trying to think of the hundreds and hundreds. I have a pet peeve today that I learned as a young photographer, and that is one of my designers. We were shooting a dining room, and I guess my assistant and I were setting the chairs around the dining room. He was like, no, 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 no. He goes, pull them out. He
Hmm.
goes, don't push the chairs underneath the table.
Yeah.
And to this day, that is still something I hear. in my head, and in fact, when I'm teaching or coaching or mentoring other photographers, I will invariably say, let me tell you about one of my pet peeves, and that is shoving chairs
Oh
underneath
yeah.
the table. That, and exactly what you're saying, the right way to arrange a pillow, the right way to have the floral rotated so it looks beautiful for this
Right.
camera angle, all those little
Well, it's
tricks
yeah, it's
or
those details.
sensitivities.
Yeah, the attention to detail that a designer has, I think, helps the photographer so much.
Yeah.
If they choose to learn from that. But there was so many things like you mentioned, just all the different elements of an interior that are important. One of the things that was the most eye-opening to me was the elevation of my camera,
Hmm.
and where a designer would say, "No, you can't shoot it from that high. That's
Right.
not how I want to look at the room here."
Right.
And that was really interesting.
I'll share a very quick anecdote about camera height, and I 100% agree. I love to have the camera height to feel intimate, as if you can sit down in the space, or even if you're walking into the space, if you're not near seating,
Mhm.
you need to have the camera the right height to make the space either feel majestic or to have the furnishings feel proportional to one another.
Mhm.
Camera height is such uh, a way to kill a good shot if it's
Oh,
wrong.
sure. Yeah.
Um, but I have one of my commercial clients that I haven't worked with now for a few years. My assistant and I would laugh a little bit because she would say, "Can you get the camera a little lower?" And I would say, "Okay, okay, we'll get a little bit lower." And she'd come back, "No, a little bit lower." It's like, "Any lower? Okay, we'll get it a little bit lower. We'll get it down a little bit lower." She'd come back, we're doing what we're doing. "No, no, 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 a little bit lower." My assistant and I would laugh. Said, "How we're going to be underneath the coffee table if we get any lower." Now, the interesting thing is she was a commercial client, but she did marketing for a furniture and design showroom, a big, they had whatever, dozens of them around the country. And I think in Florida, they may have been 6 or 7.
Okay.
So we were selling furniture as much as we were selling vignettes and designer motifs and atmosphere.
Mhm.
So if we were shooting a cocktail table or if we were shooting a sofa, I mean, it was almost a joke how low she wanted the camera. So that, not to go too down the rabbit hole of that story, but you mentioned camera height. This
Yeah,
lady really wanted it low.
interesting. So let me ask you now, once you got things rolling business-wise, how did you keep that going? Did you do active
Yeah.
marketing, and what was that like? Um,
Um,
or did
I'll
it
give
just
you.
come to you?
I'll answer the question two different ways, and
Okay.
then I'll try to get specific. Here's the first way I'll answer it. I think I got my business rolling by trying to differentiate myself from other photographers, like we talked about at the beginning, to
Yeah.
try to have a signature look, to try to create images that were memorable and
Mhm.
distinctive. Um, Transition that to, well, how do you remain relevant? How do you remain fresh? And the answer there is, I think you need to be willing to, and this is hard, and it has been hard for me, um, be willing to be adaptable to new demands of photographers. And, you and I having shot now for 3 decades, those demands have changed over the years. And so the
Yeah.
demand these days might be more stylistic in terms of it's different than maybe the way I used to want to deliver images.
Mhm.
Images used to be dark, evening, more theatrical. Now
Okay.
images, admittedly, are more bright, daytime, naturalistic. So remaining relevant now is maybe harder, because for me at least, because I'm trying and clinging to, and because I think it's important, my own signature style, but at
Mhm.
the same time being respectful of what my clients are demanding of me, because it may not always be my first inclination, right? So the second answer is, to remain relevant, you need to be willing to change. But as far as the nuts and bolts of, hey, get how did I begin my career and gain these clients? My
Mhm.
simple answer is shooting as much as possible.
Okay.
And I joined the ASID, American Society of Interior Designers.
Uh-huh.
I joined the Builders Association, and I would go out and network. I never liked it. I never liked necessarily going and schmoozing and rubbing elbows. Every now and again, shooting some of the party stills for their respective newsletters and stuff. But that was what networking was back then. I'm not so sure that really ever helped, because there's that thought that, the more you're out there, the more people know who you are. But then there's also the flip side of that, and that could be, you don't want those folks to think of you as the photographer shooting the event. I mean, that might be a little bit of a snooty way to think about it. But, these designers, they like branding, right? They're very brand oriented.
Sure.
And so I guess we as photographers and we as owners of our photography studio need to be owners of our photography brands also. And so as a kind of, not as a rule, but just as a, hey, this is my life and this is how I want to spend my time. I didn't really go to a lot of those events, but I certainly did my best to get established. And, if I were to say what is the best thing for a young photographer to do, I always say, create a beautiful portfolio any way you can, because otherwise they're not going to take you seriously.
Sure.
And so that might mean shooting stuff on spec once or twice to get your portfolio built. Even though I'm not necessarily a proponent of shooting things for free, I don't think it's a good idea. But you got a portfolio build, and be, of course, a professional. And I know I'm changing the answer, but being a professional that they can trust and rely upon as much as a photographer that delivers quality pictures, because I think that's probably half of the job. I'd love to say that 99.9% of the job is delivering gorgeous work, but I don't think it's that. I think it's at best half. The other half is, do they want to work with you? Do they want to hire you? Are they going to hire you again? Are you fun to work with? Do you inspire them? And so maybe this goes back to my film background. I always feel like the collaborative and the sharing experience is, it's what makes them excited. I want to shoot another job with you.
Yeah. And, especially if you're showing them something that maybe they haven't seen happen before, and that becomes exciting for them.
That's true.
They're in that space and they see what you're able to do with the space, and they can be a part of that. And that is a big deal. And
and I've always, again, my personal aesthetic is I want to put their work on a pedestal. I'll tell you a very quick anecdote. Years ago, many years ago, I had an interview with the designer, and I ended up getting the job. I ended up getting his, it's more than one shoot. It was like 5 or 7 shoots, I forget. Even a couple of them were travel shoots. He said something to me that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. He said to me, and I'll try to remember the exact quote. He goes, I want these pictures to look like you weren't even there. And I was like, slap in the face. Now, I get that now, because now maybe there's that lean towards naturalism, right? Where the pictures take themselves and the photographers aren't really part of the process. Magic just happened and whoa, there's the image. Nothing was needed to do to create it. And if it was, it's not that apparent. Now, again, going back in time, my aesthetic and my background all was, wow, I'm offended by that because I wanted to have my signature. I wanted to do something cool and different. But this guy was like, he splash of cold water. I want these pictures to look like you weren't even there. Now,
and I get that. And there's a lot of effort that goes into making a photograph that looks that way.
True. 100%. And I, for the record, marvel at photographers or photographs that appear effortless. I mean, I think we all know they're not, but for somebody to be able to create work that feels like it happened is maybe more difficult than somebody who creates work that it's maybe a little bit more obvious. Oh, okay, there's the backlighting coming through the window, and there's something in the foreground that's obviously been placed just right. but we are who we are, right? And if so, and like you said, people want to hire, Alan Blakely, people want to hire Barry Grossman or another photographer. They can be choosy these days because there's a lot of really good
Oh, sure.
photographers
Yeah.
out there. So I think another bit of advice I can give to the photography community, especially young photographers, be confident in who you are as a shooter. And I really try to be. It's not always easy because the clients will push you and pull you in the way that they want. But I'd like to think that most of them are inviting you to their party because they want you to be there. It's rare to hear. It's rare. In fact, I haven't never heard it again that a designer said to me, "I want to make it look like you didn't show up." But that's what he said.
That's interesting.
Isn't that cool?
Oh, I do think that you're spot on with the fact that they hire you for the look that you bring, and
right.
rarely
And it's part of the fun.
Rarely do they want you to show up and do something that's not characteristic of your work. So
right. And there are clients that have certain, especially new clients, that might have fixed, predetermined expectations as far as
sure,
what they think the picture should look like, and I also think it's important to listen and maintain your own sense of confidence to think, okay, I know what they want. This is how I'm going to give them what they want.
Yeah.
And that's a balance because you don't want to come off, and I'd like to think never come off like I'm smarter than my clients or I know better than my clients. I would definitely recommend.
That's not a good place to go.
That's not a good place to go. Again, we're respectful of their wants and needs, and lots of times giving them just what they want. You know what? Sometimes they do know more. They know more about the project. They know more about the staircase and that piece of artwork next to it. They know more about that than we do.
Right.
And so when they say, "Hey, listen, I want a shot here," and then it may not have been what you had in mind, but that's cool. That's part of the give and take. That's part of the collaborative nature of what we do.
Yeah, you make an important point there, and I think that's really valuable for younger photographers to understand that that working relationship and what a balance that really is.
Yeah, and there are clients that keep coming back. 5, 10, 15 years. You have that lifelong, hopefully, or long partnership. And they every time a photo shoot comes up, they're ringing you because they now know what the relationship is going to yield through that partnership.
Yeah, and there's a level of trust and confidence, and there's some peace of mind there in calling you and knowing that at the end of the day they're going to get photographs that they're happy with.
Yeah,
and that's huge. There's no guesswork at that point.
No, and it's an investment of time, energy, resources, money.
Yeah,
and it's nice to know that you're going to be delivering that high level of on their high expectations. That's to me the best when you're working with people that have those high expectations, as opposed to, and it may happen to all of us, and it still does to me, working with clients whose expectations aren't as high. And how do you achieve their goals and at the same time maintain your brand, hold on to your own artistic and technical integrity as far as what you're delivering? Because nothing is worse, and I'm sure you can, and some of our members would agree, I assume, nothing's worse than just churning out pictures for the paycheck. Ain't none of those pictures in my portfolio.
No.
Right? And at the end of the day, of course, we're all making a living, but the real joy for me, it doesn't come from money making, it comes from picture making.
Sure.
The money making is lovely, but it's nice to see the check come in, so to speak, but there's nothing inspiring about it.
No, I completely agree with that. That's why we're in it to begin with, at least for me, is that we get to make images that are exciting, and it's fun to go to work because it's not the work that that we consider work necessarily. It's a new experience every shoot. And
I was talking to a friend of mine just earlier this morning. He's in business. He makes a lot more money than me. He does these electronic billboards,
Okay.
and he leases them and he sells them. Mostly leases them. I would not want to be in his business, even though he makes a lot more money. It's like, really, you lease electronic billboards. I mean, nothing against that, but I think we're the lucky ones, truthfully.
Yeah. Well, and I think it speaks back to the fact that it's an artistic pursuit, and that we're all just right brain dominant, and we need to make a living somehow. And this is a way that makes a living and also fulfills us artistically. So I think that's interesting. Barry, before we get too far into this, I want to talk about the fact that you chose to teach and kind of get back your secrets.
Kicking and screaming. No,
I'm wondering how did that begin for you?
How did that come about? Well, around 2012, 13, they had kind of asked me, do I want to do a workshop? We kind of talked about it, and it never really came to pass for a variety of reasons. Maybe I can only speak to me. I'm not so sure I was ready. I'm not so sure I was capable of doing it. But, because it's a lot of pressure, and, do you want to do it? Am I going to do a good job? Around 2016, 2017, I started having the conversation again. And I could tell you with whom, but I was like, sure, I think I'm ready now. And we had just photographed a beautiful resort hotel in South Florida. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool to do one of our first workshop at this amazing resort hotel? There's so much to shoot. There's rooms, there's gorgeous lobbies. And this is like a classic, it's like Spanish architecture from the 1920s in South Florida. That, yes, there is some of that down here. It's not all Art Deco. And so it was a lot of cool architecture to shoot.
Yeah.
And I did the first one, and then I started to do a little bit of online coaching on portfolio reviews, things like that. The next year we did a second one. The next year was 2018, and we shot 2 gorgeous, super cool modern homes out in Las Vegas.
Okay.
And at this time I was like, okay, now this is starting to make sense. I feel comfortable talking about my shooting methods. I feel comfortable philosophizing about why I like doing what I'm doing, and not just the how are you doing it, but the why. And then I became a little bit more proficient in the post-production aspect, and a lot of people are interested in, not only what are your secrets, but you're setting up your lights. Why are you setting up your lights here, and how are you dropping them in? So 2018, the second one, I got a little bit better at the teaching aspect, and now we're structuring these over 5 days. So we have 2 days of shooting, a day of introduction, day 2 is shoot day, day 3 is shoot day, and day 4 is like post-production and review day.
Okay.
So now we're getting it a little bit more refined. And subsequent to that, we've done 2 others, and we're about to do our 5th. And if your question is why am I doing it, it's it's not the best business decision, but you know what? I do it because I've discovered that I do like it. I think I get as much out of it, maybe more, and I like sharing. I'm at the point in my life, the point in my career where I want to give back to the community, however much I can give, and people are going to take in what they take in, and not and discard what they don't feel is relevant to them, of course.
Sure.
And in fact, I'm always saying that at the end of our workshops, I want you guys and gals, and I'm very proud of our female attendees. We usually have almost a 50-50 male to female, which is
interesting.
Super cool. I want you, men and women, to do things like you have already been doing them, but now maybe think about how you're doing them the next time you have a photo shoot. I don't want you to necessarily shoot like me or try to implement lighting the way I do, but I'm giving you a couple of tools to put in your toolbox. And so now you have, a little more confidence, because let's be honest, a lot of interior photographers, they're not implementing lighting at all, and they never learned it.
Yeah.
And so I'm bringing to the table really basics in terms of how and why you implement
Hmm.
lighting. Nowadays, it doesn't have to be all the time because the new digital sensors and the cameras have become
Right.
so sophisticated.
You don't
Not
need
to
to get it
mention
all
that,
on frame. Yeah.
yeah, and expectations of the final image have changed, where people are
Hmm.
expecting a certain look, and that look typically is more of a natural,
Hmm.
unaltered with photographic lighting final image.
Yeah.
But it's kind of nice to have control over your image so you can know
Oh,
when to
sure.
bring in and when not to, and when you need to, and when you can, if you wanted us to be playful and whimsical or creative. So the workshops have become, I'd like to think, a wonderful experience for all, myself included,
Hmm.
sharing of ideas, sharing of techniques. And then the other aspect of it, and I'm sure a lot of people come just for this other aspect, and that is they get exposed to the super high end medium format camera systems that we bring to the
Well, yeah,
table. And
that's
so we bring
yeah.
we bring out the big toys, and there's folks that come because they're like, wow, I've never shot medium format, I've never shot
Mhm.
with a technical camera. Forget I've never used lights. They've never shot with the really, sophisticated camera systems. And
Yeah.
so it's cool to expose photographers to that, the benefits of using those systems. So I'd like to think it's a well-rounded experience. It's working with me working with them. I make a hell of an assistant because it's usually how we've done it in the past. It's we usually 12 to 15 photographers, so that's
Okay.
fairly intimate, but it's not crazy. And
Yeah.
it's me, my assistant. I partner with a company called Capture Integration. They're out of
Hmm.
Atlanta. They're
Yeah.
resellers of all these toys,
Yeah.
Phase One, Fuji, everything,
You bet.
and they'll bring 3 to 4 people,
Hmm.
sometimes just a camera rep or two. So the one thing that's cool about the workshop experience, and honestly, it's one of the reasons I continue to do it with these partners, if you will,
Hmm.
is it's not a hard sell, if you will. I'm there. I feel like I'm one of you. I'm there as a photographer. I'm not there as a camera salesman. And the truth is, they're very cool about it. If I felt like they were hitting people over the head with, hey, are you going to buy anything?
Yeah.
Then it would be very uncomfortable for me. But
Yeah.
it's my workshop. They're there a
Hmm.
support system for me, and it's each one has been successful, which is cool. And success is measured in different ways.
Oh,
I
sure.
I maintain my relationships with these photographers, which is wonderful.
That's
They're
great.
constantly reaching out to me, which is not everybody, but I
Continue
have
to
some that are
mentor.
more. Yeah, they send me pictures. What do you think about this?
Hmm.
Can we schedule a portfolio review? I want to share what I've been doing.
Hmm.
And every now and again, not that I claim to be the most expert opinion on how to construct a contract, but I've been doing it long enough that I can help them
Yeah.
with that kind of stuff too. So I can be fairly pragmatic and practical as a studio owner, even though that's not my favorite part of the business.
Hmm.
So, but it's been a great experience. And then, of course, during the shutdown, when we couldn't do one of our workshops,
Yeah.
somebody reached out to me and he's like, well, can you do something online? Can you help? And I was like, how am I supposed to do that? And so that next thing you know, I was doing some video tutorials,
Okay.
which was, I'm a little bit obsessive, if you couldn't tell that, a little bit about my personality. So I dove pretty deep into, okay, how can I do this? I spoke
Hmm.
with a couple of friends on, how to set up a website so people can look at these
Yeah.
the tutorials that we put together. And it's been very eye-opening. I've learned that I like to teach, so maybe
That's
at some point when I run out of energy and I'm too tired to schlep around all this camera
right.
equipment, maybe I will do more of
Stay
that
in
as
one
opposed
spot and
to,
teach. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, not that it's easy. We bust our tails for, especially at the workshops. We're working very hard.
Yeah. That's hard work.
It's hard work, and like I said, I make a dang good assistant, and that goes back to my film days
Yeah.
as a crew member. I loved one of my favorite jobs was being an AC, an assistant camera
Mhm.
person. I
Yeah.
would load the film, I pulled the focus while the camera operator
Hmm.
uh, framed everything up, whatever it took. And I always prided myself on being a good assistant. Now, that said, I did not, I know you probably have asked, because I've listened to several of your other podcasts, did I apprentice under somebody else? Did I assist another photographer? And the answer is no, I didn't. And that's not because I didn't try.
That's unusual.
Yeah, I did. I tried. I reached out to a photographer who was the top guy down here, at least, and the, you know, the trailblazer. And I reached out to him, and maybe this is one of the reasons I shied away from teaching and sharing for so long. But his answer to me was, "I'm not running a photography school." And I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute, really?" And I guess because I found out that, you know, maybe he had some assistants that might have gone behind his back. Those kinds of things can happen in our industry, but
yeah,
you know, I didn't go that route.
That's part of the deal. Yeah,
Yeah,
but that is unusual that you didn't, you know, work with another photographer.
I was the trial and error, put a smile on my face, be confident in what I can do type of guy.
Yeah,
and
well,
be willing to learn from others around me type of guy, even if those others were clients.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. You know, obviously, you're able to observe, you know, other work and you know,
Yeah.
try to figure out how to get from where you were to there, and that to me, it talks about your artistic aptitude as much as anything. What's your view of the industry right now as far as architectural photography? I mean, you and I
Oh
have been
boy.
in this a long time. Most of the
Yes.
members of our group have been in it 20 plus years.
Wow.
We're not going to be shooting forever. And
We're not? Well,
well, who
it's
knows?
funny.
I'm
my
just wondering what your
opinion,
view is.
what is it? It's Tuesday. My opinion on a Tuesday might be different next Tuesday, because that's kind of my personality.
Okay.
But the truth is, and I'm being facetious, but there's some truth in it. The industry's changing week to week, and my feeling of how I fit within it changes.
Hmm.
I would say I'm having a pretty good year, and so I'm very encouraged.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I would say, and it's probably pointless to go back to the 90s, but if we're going to go back to the 90s and the early 2000s, I think it was really about establishing myself as and conveying that brand and that signature style.
Hmm.
10 years later, it was about maintaining it and expanding, finding new people with whom to work, finding new projects, higher end projects to shoot, shooting resort and hotel, transitioning away from homes. That's super important, by the way. And if you started shooting hotels and workspace and other interesting things like that, I hate to say going back to residential is boring. It isn't, and that's really my bread and butter.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of other exciting stuff to shoot out there from
Sure.
an interior design perspective, other than living rooms and dining rooms and bedrooms.
Yeah.
So expanding what you're shooting
Hmm.
is super important, and that's a decision you can make as a professional, seeking out marketing, networking with those designer or architects
Hmm.
that do work within that space.
Yeah.
So you say, what's my opinion of the industry today? It's continuing to transition to these new subjects. So, for example, last week, I shot a fire station. Now, that might be standard for a lot of people, but it's not standard for Barry Grossman photography. You know, I shoot a lot of workspace and some educational,
Hmm.
some industrial, but I may have shot 2 firehouses in my 30 years. So it was kind of
Yeah.
cool to get that. And that's with a new design firm. And they don't specialize in firehouses, but they do a lot of them.
Interesting.
And yeah, so it's like, you know what, this is kind of cool. I'm shooting a firehouse. Has some photographic challenges. Shooting
Oh, yeah.
inside, shooting outside. They wanted to have people in the pictures, firemen, and you know, it was part of it felt like a resort shoot because I had some images in the fitness and workout room. We had some guys working the
Okay.
machines and stuff. I do the same pictures at a hotel.
Yeah. Same
So
skill set.
same skill set, working with people. These are not professional models. So again, I'm hearkening back to that Miami photographer that I learned a lot from, how he dealt with people, how he schmoozed people, how he made people feel comfortable in front of the camera. So it's everything all at once you bring to your new work. And so, the state of the industry for me right now is not that different, but I'm probably moving away from residential, not consciously. And if somebody said, "Hey, Barry, I want you to shoot 5 homes for me in the next month," I'd be okay. But I'm getting more different subject matter to shoot, which is exciting.
Yeah.
So it's whatever is new and exciting, and keeps you on your toes and keeps you wanting to shoot fresh images, and not fall back into your habits. That's one of the expressions that I use at my workshops, which is, listen, you guys are all great photographers, but I don't want you to fall back into your habits on your next shoot. Not that the habits are bad. If they don't yield wonderful results, do something different just because, take a chance. So I try to do that whenever possible. And this firehouse shoot was mostly a natural light, quote unquote, photo shoot, but we were shooting this one. It wasn't the fitness shot. It was like a conference shot.
Okay.
And so it was like a classroom where we had the guy, like the fire chief was up front, and we had the rows of firemen sitting in like a classroom type, setup.
Yeah.
And I shot it 2 different ways. One from kind of the back of the room, shooting towards the chief, kind of over the shoulder, if you will, of the guys. Yeah. And that gave us a beautiful view. There was a glass wall on the right. And then we shot it from the other direction. Now, when I shot the first direction, we had some lighting coming from right to left. When I turned it around, I had to replicate that lighting. Okay. And so I was like, okay, I could just shoot it flat with the overhead lighting, but why not take a chance? Why not try? I don't want to fall back into my habits of just doing the maybe the logical or easier solution. Let's take a chance and try something. So I had a 1,000-watt pro photo unit. I put that just outside this glass wall, and it backlit the guys for a really cool effect. And I was like, okay, let's get a couple with the light. We'll get a couple without it, just in case it's a little much. And having reviewed most of the pictures, and I haven't done final processing on this shoot yet, the dynamic ones are the exciting ones. And those are the ones where, even to a degree, it felt like these amateur models, if you will, had the most energy because the light provided that energy. So I guess that the next time we're shooting a living room, the next time we're shooting, maybe not necessarily a school environment, that might have been taking a risk that could backfire. But the next time we're setting up for a shot, how can we bring energy to it with our tools when quote unquote natural light or the subject matter is a little plain? The image, it needs to add something to the design every now and then, even at the risk of offending that designer from 20 years ago who said, I want images to look like you weren't there. So sometimes the photographer has to show up, I guess.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, and such an important point that you can always add something that is going to enhance that photograph. And years ago, I used to work with an art director, and he'd been in the advertising business for many, many years. And what he would always say to me was, it lacks sparkle. We need to add more sparkle. Now, I didn't know really what that meant, but
who does?
I later, but my reaction to that was, I need to add a little bit of contrast or a highlight somewhere,
right,
to make that lighting a little bit more exciting and not quite so flat. But I don't need to make it obvious. It doesn't need to be theatrical, but I just need to add that little touch.
Right. And that's your signature. That's Alan's signature. And the way you do it is going to be different than how I or another photographer may. And that's what makes it fun. And listen, and the cool thing about at least how I'm shooting, and I'm sure most people who are implementing strobe lighting, and that's pretty much what I'm doing now,
right,
is you're bringing this lighting in, backlighting or side lighting or whatever it is. It's coming in on its own layer, And so if you do go a little crazy, it doesn't have to be 100%. You can always pull it
Sure.
down to 90 to 80 to 10. You can mask it in with more subtlety
Hmm.
or being more over the top. And that's something we talk about in the workshops as well. But it's also lighting for strategy. I think kind of the difference and how I kind of approach it is um, being strategic with your light implementation, not just
A
implementing
reason
lighting.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah, knowing where and knowing why is as important as how do I layer it in, at what percentage, how do I mask it in Photoshop. That's the boring part. But to me, the exciting part is bringing the lighting in and actually having it, treating your spaces as three-dimensional spaces, right?
Yeah.
Because eventually they're two-dimensional, right?
Yeah.
And we think in two dimensions lots of times because we're sitting in front of the computer
Hmm.
so much. But when we're out in the field shooting is when we need to start to think in three dimensions. It's a lot more challenging,
Hmm.
especially if you have multiple layers of
Oh,
space.
sure. Yeah.
But that's the fun part. And for me, the tools have gotten so, I don't want to say easy, but it's gotten a lot easier
Well, yeah,
to
it is
do
most
this.
definitely is a lot easier than it used to
Right.
be,
Yeah.
especially if you're, running monolights and, um,
Mhm.
I'm
I
not
got rid
very,
of almost all of my uh, electrical lighting, and I'm using
yeah.
all, for the most part, battery operated,
Hmm.
only battery operated lighting
Yeah,
systems. It's just
I
so
am
much
too. I've got
easier.
some 2000-watt second power packs if anybody's interested,
Yeah,
but,
right. To do body pressing. Yeah, the 27-pound black line Speedotrons, those are long gone. Everything else is long gone. I
yeah,
have
the
now.
Broncolor and,
Oh, those are gorgeous lights, and if anybody's interested, we could talk about the equipment that I use. It's not that I'm a pro photo guy just
Mhm,
because
mhm,
I think they're simple and they've been pretty solid. The ones that I bought in 2013 are still working,
mhm,
but I've since upgraded to the smaller ones. So I have B1s
mhm.
and B1Xs, and
Yeah,
then I have the oh god, I can't remember the B10 pluses.
okay.
I have several B10 pluses. I'm probably going to get one of those little ones. I think it's the A2, the little cute ones.
The little
But
tiny ones, yeah.
yeah, for the most part, I'm using the B10 pluses, and that gives me enough, for the most part, enough power to do my work.
Mhm.
And we could talk about, my camera systems a little bit if you feel like this is relevant to the conversation as well. I've been a phase one guy since 2003.
You're right, yeah.
20 years of shooting with phase one, and I've for the most part upgraded to the new system on average every 2 to 3
Okay.
years.
You're using a technical, camera?
Yeah, but I just grown accustomed to using it.
Mhm,
I've used the phase one XT, which is their very small technical
yeah.
camera. I don't own an XT. I own a Cambo,
Mhm.
which is basically the same thing. The
Yeah, that's
reason
what
I
I think
haven't
that's
made
what
the
most
investment
people
in the XT system is purely financial, to be honest,
do.
because all of my glass is going to have to be retrofitted to work
Oh,
with the XT system. And the XT system in and of itself isn't dreadfully expensive, but to start over with four lenses to retrofit all four of them gets expensive. But
yeah.
I'm quite happy with my technical camera system. And the cool thing about the phase one digital back is I can use what they call an electronic shutter, which
Mhm.
basically means I leave my mechanical lenses open, I
Yeah.
leave my copal zeros open,
Mhm.
and let the phase one essentially effectively be its own shutter.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really cool things we can talk about or not talk about that the camera allows you to do with multiple exposures in one raw file.
Mhm.
Um, Super long, virtually however long you want exposures at any time of day within one raw file, which is shocking. They
Mhm.
call that frame averaging. Lots of cool things that you can do with that system. So we shot, for example, where were we? Like a courtyard of a mall, and
Mm.
we had a lot of people milling about. And I was
Mhm.
like, this will make most all of those people disappear. And I set like I think an 8-minute exposure in
Okay.
a bright mall,
Yeah.
and virtually they disappear. And the way in which they do that is the digital back senses what the proper exposure is. Let's just say the exposure is a 30th of a second at an ISO 50 at an aperture of an 11. We're all accustomed to those lens settings and sensor settings. It has to do with the amount of light and the sensitivity of the sensor and the aperture. Okay. Now, how do you turn that 30th of a second into a minute or 5 minutes? The old days, you'd have to put a very, very heavy a neutral density filter on. I have several of those, and I've used them over the years, and I love doing that type of daytime photography to make the clouds smear, to make the water smooth, to a degree, make people disappear, just moving throughout the frame, make car headlights streak, whatever. But the digital back through the frame averaging feature says, okay, it's a 30th of a second at these parameters. How long do you want it to be? How long should the exposure be, quote unquote exposure? You want it a minute? Okay, well, I'm going to give you 300 frames, a 30th each, give or take, pardon my math. And we're going to blend, we're going to average all of those 300 frames into one long exposure. And the digital back creates one raw file over that time frame. It's pretty remarkable.
It is.
And so you're controlling time in a way that you can't with any other camera.
Right.
And a byproduct of that is, of course, it's averaging out noise. Not that the camera's noisy, but however noisy it may be, it's averaging that noise out.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're getting a digital file that is basically creamy as possible, especially in the shadow areas. And you're getting the benefit of, okay, how long do you want the exposure to be? And as an architectural photographer, certainly shooting exteriors, it's a joy to have that just by tapping the digital back.
Yeah.
Isn't that pretty cool? So I don't need to use the ND filters anymore. And the other specialty that it does is that they call it dual exposure plus. And that's a little bit more straightforward. It creates two exposures and it embeds them into one raw file. Okay. So basically, it's like shooting a bracket of two at the moment. They limit it, and it's separated by, it's a 3-stop bracket. So it's just giving you more detail to tap into.
That's a lot of information. Yeah,
it's shocking. So I never, for the record, I shouldn't say never, but let's just say never, do a bracket. I don't need to, because I have the dual exposure plus option if I need it. And so I'm, for all my ambient exposures, using the dual exposure plus option, which effectively takes a, whatever it is, 15.5 stop dynamic range, and it gives me 3 extra. So it's now over 18 stop dynamic range, which is, overkill, but we love overkill.
That's more information that you can reproduce. So
right. So this is all technical stuff that I'm assuming the average photographer might think is irrelevant or boring, but for us as architectural photographers, I would like to think most of us are camera geeks, and I am, going back to my early days, falling in love with my dad's camera.
Yeah, and I think that in this industry, you kind of have to be, because at least for me, this is more technically demanding than any other kind of commercial work that I ever did. I mean, I had 3 different studios over the years, and we did product and food and lifestyle and all kinds of things like that. Nothing was as difficult as the architecture.
Right. Well, I think part of the technical challenge, it could be an obstacle between you and your final image. And I think the goal of having this camera equipment, any camera equipment, is to have as few obstacles in your way. Now, that said, this ain't a point and shoot system. This isn't taking the camera out, clicking. That's far fewer obstacles. You're creating a picture simply. However, half of our work more than likely is spent in post-production or thereabouts. Yeah. And it's those obstacles are far fewer when you have these digital files that are this rich.
Yeah, when you got a robust file that you have so much information to work with.
Yeah,
it makes such a difference.
Post-production aspect is far more pleasurable, if that's the right word. It's far less disappointing and far fewer compromises when you
Yes.
have that robust, to use your very smart word, digital file. I will say this about the technical camera system in the Phase 1.
Mhm.
It does not shoot pictures easier.
No.
It doesn't. But I can't remember the last shoot I went on, especially a designer shoot or an architectural shoot, where my intention was to shoot easy. And I'm not trying to be, clever. I'm being serious. I think part of the, at least for me, methodology and part of the, from getting from point A to point Z is it's a process that shouldn't necessarily be ridiculous and painful and 3 hours. that those days are long gone.
Yes.
But it's a process that's very specific and needs a tool that allows us as photographers to be as refined as we want.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not the tool for every shoot. So, I mean, I have a Canon, I have a Sony system, and I go out with those systems when it's the right system.
Sure.
And when I come back and do post-production with those systems, I see the shortcomings, and they're significant. But I shot a lot faster. I shot a lot. I have a higher shot yield, which is, there's advantages to both systems. And not every shoot is going to be a technical camera shoot with a large format body or medium format digital back. But for me, at this point in my life, most of them are.
Okay.
and to a degree, I think it's, at the end of the day, if you will, the pictures speak for themselves, but that doesn't really define us as photographers. I think the joy of shooting is in fact shooting. And I love working with a camera that is, gives me more technical control over the image on set. And in addition to having more fun in post-production and having fewer compromises, the shooting experience is different. You more than likely do have to slow down slightly.
Absolutely.
You more than likely are going to be more painstaking. I shoot all of my work tethered, unless I'm on a rooftop of a building, mind you. But most of my interiors and stuff, I'm shooting tethered to 16-inch, usually 16-inch laptop. Every now and again, we bring the bigger monitor, but that's rare these days. It's just a more precise, painstaking, but ultimately yields better results way of working, I think. And I've shot with all the systems, and at the workshop we do play with the Fuji system.
Okay.
And I am very impressed with the Fuji system. I'm not sure if have you worked with, what medium format systems have you shot?
Yeah, well, I use the Fuji system.
The GFX.
The GFX 100. Yeah.
No, it's a nice file, and the lenses, those native Fuji lenses are impressive.
They are.
I've used it with the Actis and some of those retrofit lenses as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's cool. It's cool. But you get what you pay for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's kind of whether a camera that's 10 times the price gives you an image 10 times better. That's a debatable, controversial discussion. I think for me, and listen, I remember when I could barely afford a camera at all, and I wanted to buy these. Do you remember Paul C. Buff? Is he still around making White Lightning?
I don't know. I don't think Paul's around anymore, and I'm not sure what happened to the company. But yeah, I do. I knew Paul. Yeah, I remember.
Well, I had several of those different lighting, the monolights, and when I first got started, he had the 10,000. They were like white cans.
Yes,
they were super ugly. I remember they were never color balanced. I had to put this yellow UV filter across them.
Very blue.
Back in the days of shooting film. And there was a photographer. I'll mention his name. His name is Len Kaufman, if he's out there. And I remember him saying to me, because I wanted to buy his lights, and he was a very straight guy, very meticulous and very scientific mind, good photographer. And his bit of advice to me was, because I wanted to buy these lights, he had 3 of them. I said, "Man, I'm not sure if I should buy this." He goes, "Are you going to use them?" he goes, "Are you going to use these? You going to make money with them?" I said, "Yeah, I'm trying." He goes, "And what are you thinking about?"
Yeah.
So that's not to say be a lunatic spending money on every piece of gear. I don't do that
Sure.
either.
Yeah.
But I feel that very basic argument applies to, buy the camera system that you're going to use.
Mhm.
There's no point in
Exactly.
buying this camera or that lighting if you're not going to use it. I'm not sure how I got that.
Well, and you've got to have good, reliable tools.
100%.
And you
100%. But at the end of the day, the photographer takes the pictures, not the camera. Let's not fail to mention that. When I was thinking about our conversation today, I knew we were talking about camera equipment because it is relevant
Yes, sure it is.
to our work. But lest we forget that, of course, it's the photographer that does the creative work, not the camera.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not about the camera. Exactly.
Well, it's a little bit. Okay.
A little bit about the camera.
A little
Yeah.
bit. It's mostly
Good
about the
tools.
photography.
And you got to have good glass. So,
Oh,
yeah,
for sure.
that being said, Barry, I think we're going to wrap up here. I really appreciate your time today. This is very informative, and those listening to this are going to gain a lot of information. You've been very generous in talking about your background and your business technique and your philosophy of shooting and all these things that people can't get anywhere else. And so
Well, I
I thank you.
appreciate your platform, Alan. I know you and I have been together forever. I've been with
Yes.
AIAP, and I'll just say I've garnered some clients being with AIAP over the years, and so I've always respected you, appreciating being a part of this community, and it's my pleasure to contribute in however I can. Large, small, medium, very small amount. So I also appreciate the opportunity to come on with you because this has been a lot of fun. I thank you.
Thank you. This has been huge. And we will put information about your website and also your workshops. And then if you'd like to put anything as far as, your sponsor for your workshops in there as well, happy to do that. I know the capture integration guys as well. So
yeah, they're all over. I think they've got people out by you as well, and they've been wonderful to me over the years. But yeah, I would love to share information about the workshop. I believe it's October. The announcement is going out today, ironically, October 1st.
Okay.
We're photographing what I'm assuming is going to be, because the last time we were there, it was a very stunning and unique designer show house.
Okay.
In the foothills of Georgia, just south of Atlanta. It's called Serenbe. And hopefully you'll be able to provide a link to the sign up page, or at least where you can see information about it. And what's really cool about these show houses is, every designer wants to outdo the other one. And so you've got like a dozen or 14 or 15 designers, and they each have a room or a space, and they do beautiful work up there. I've been super impressed with the and for obvious reason, the Atlanta design community is top notch, and these homes are stunning. They're very cool from the outside looking in, and once you're inside, there's really, for me, very as a Miami shooter, for the most part, I have a lot of slick and clean and reflective surfaces these days to shoot. But in the Atlanta show houses, you're getting a lot more detail in terms of texture and wood and stone. And these surfaces and their design overall reacts really well to lighting. So it's obviously a bit of a field day if you want it to work with light and experience, playing with the lighting tools. But this year and every year, we also play with, I'll use the air quotes, natural light technique as well. How do you create beautiful images with natural light? So I know a lot of photographers want to experience both. So that'll be awesome.
Well, we're happy to link those in the description of this video and also the podcast. So this will be available on all of the major podcast platforms.
Oh boy.
Again, Thank you,
Thank
Barry.
you.
We're going to wrap up here. I do appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to talking with you again soon.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Thank you, Alan.
This has been another episode of A Photographer's Life. If you've enjoyed this program, please let us know by liking this episode and subscribing to this channel. A Photographer's Life is brought to you by the Association of Independent Architectural Photographers. This episode is copyrighted, and may not be used in full or in part, without the written permission of the AIAP. Please join us again soon for another inside look at the world of professional architectural photography.